Check, check, 1, 2. Check, check, 1 2 1 2. Testing, test, 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 1 2. Testing, 1 2 3 4 1 2.
Hi, good evening. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out to the Movement Infrastructure Project. We're going to go ahead and get started here in the auditorium classroom space. This is your last chance for a while to grab a drink, grab a snack, come get settled. We'll be meeting in here over the next couple minutes, and we're looking to get started as soon as we can. So grab some snacks, grab some drinks, come on, get comfy, and we'll introduce our fantastic panelists pretty soon. Welcome, welcome. Everyone settled down so quickly. Thank you. We're really excited at the Movement Infrastructure Project to welcome you to our Election Organizing and Opportunities panel, and we are somewhat excited to welcome you to the first debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. But let's focus on the panel for now. We have some fantastic people gathered from all over DC and national organizations, and before we introduce them, we'll just do a quick bit about you guys, us, why you're here. So welcome again to the Movement Infrastructure Project. We are a fairly new organization. We've been here at this beautiful space at Petworth United Methodist Church since March of this year. We're here because we believe that just like bridges and sewer systems and all of the really not pretty stuff keeps our cities operating smoothly, our movements are stronger when they have infrastructure to rely on, such as sound systems. We love sound systems. And trainers and people that know the city that actions take place in. We're really excited to provide that. If you're looking for more information about us, scan any one of the numerous QR codes. We really appreciate you valuing the project by donating when you purchased your ticket tonight. If you want to continue to value the project or our bartender, some of those QR codes also lead to donation links. But now that that's out of the way, a quick note. As far as going to the restroom here, you'd want to head down that flight of stairs and around the back of the church. Anyone from the project, if you're with the project or you otherwise know where the bathrooms are, raise your hand. Awesome. Look in the back of the room at the people that aren't up on stage. They can help you find the restrooms. Okay. Well, welcome, first of all, to our panelists, and thank you to all of you for being here. We really appreciate it. Out in front of us tonight, we have Brianni de Villiers, Siggy Melis, Saul Levin, and Aparna Raj from a wide range of organizations. We'll go ahead and introduce them, running down the line. Right next to me, we have Aparna Raj. While DC, that's Aparna's question. She's been on the steering committee of the Metro DC DSA for 3 years now. She's an organizer with the Stomp Out Slumlords tenant organizing campaign and has led some of Metro DC DSA's volunteer efforts, including with the Zachary Parker campaign, the Initiative 82 campaign, and Councilmember Janice Lewis George's campaign. She's also on Instagram running a food review platform at, I believe it's District Delicious? Yes, at District Delicious. Thank you so much for coming, Aparna. Next to her is Saul Levin. Saul is a union organizer and climate campaigner from Michigan. He was a co-founder and former vice president of the Congressional Workers Union, who also served as a policy advisor to Cori Bush and Deb Haaland. Currently, he is the political director and campaign director of the Green New Deal Network and a coordinator at Transit Lovers for Harris. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. Next to Saul is our birthday girl. It is Siggy Melis' birthday. Thank you so much for joining us, especially on your birthday. Siggy is a coordinator with the Poor People's Campaign and, in fact, is the Award 5 voter, as well as the National Director of Social Justice Organizing with Repairers of the Breach and the Director of Organizing at the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. She's also a community worker and organizer with deep roots in the economic justice, public transit, workers' rights, and housing movement. Last but not least, on the very end is the Movement Infrastructure Project's own Brianni de Villiers. She is the actions coordinator. My goodness, she's the actions coordinator at the Center for Popular Democracy, as well as a Gen Z intersectional organizer, a world traveler, and one of our best friends at making this project happen. Okay. Thank you again to all of you. I'm going to continue saying that.
Thank you, Hannah.
All right. Unbelievably hot right here. Is there any way that light can point? Are you guys hot? Or am I the only one in the sweater? Okay. Sweating aside. So you're all here tonight because there's been a lot of discussion about what's at stake in this election. Maybe almost too much discussion. And despite the fact that... I'm so sorry. No, you cheer for the panelists. Okay. Lots of discussion about what's at stake. It is true that our movements stand to gain a lot of ground, even gain or lose a lot of ground, even beyond winning or losing in November. We've invited you all here because we're curious about what you think about how we can use this election cycle as a movement building opportunity. We want to, as a people, expand organizing capacity, build our collective political power, and sustain that regardless of who's in office. Our first question asks, what are you doing in your organization to this end, and what do you see other orgs doing that you find promising?
Yeah, I can go. Hey, everyone. So just as a reminder, I'm the DSA person on the panel. But this is a great question because I think we also grappled with this a little bit in 2016 and 2020. You know, there was a huge groundswell of support for Bernie in 2016 and 2020 in grassroots organizing. It was the first time a ton of people, including myself, had ever seen somebody who spoke directly to what they were feeling, to like, you know, me being worried about my dad getting laid off and not being able to have health care, me being worried about my mom not being able to take off for work for necessary surgery, things that it felt like other politicians just didn't fully understand. And I think we saw sort of, you know, after those elections, we saw a lot of people go into some local organizing, and from the Bernie campaigns, particularly into local DSA chapters, including myself again. And I think that's really important because I know national politics are front and center right now. The national election is front and center, but so much of what we care about and so much of the bread and butter issues that people are dealing with every day, like how am I going to pay my rent, or how am I going to feed my kids, or is my kid's school roof caving in, really happen at the local level. And there are like a couple examples that I've seen this really come through in, with my organizing in DSA. One is through my tenant organizing. I and sort of other Stomp Out Slumlords organizers have been organizing with fellow tenants across buildings in the region in DC, Maryland, and Virginia, a lot on rent strikes, so trying to protest really terrible living conditions, also trying to like legislatively improve tenant protections in DC. And in the years that I've been doing it, at least, I've seen us win millions of dollars for rental assistance for folks in DC. I've seen us win, you know, have the OAG, the Office of the Attorney General, sue slumlords in DC. Have seen, really good stuff. Have seen conditions fixes and rent forgiveness for folks. And so like real wins for people who have been, you know, dealing with really terrible living conditions for years. And there's still a lot to do, but you can see sort of like, you know, building power with tenants, building tenant unions, how over the course of years, not just sort of like within a campaign cycle, but how that's been able to like really benefit people's lives. And then the other thing I was going to mention is Initiative 82. And to give some like very quick, I'll try to keep this quick. I know we have like a lot, but to give some very quick context for folks who don't know, in 2018, there was an initiative called Initiative 77 that was the same thing. It would have, if passed, would have raised the tipped minimum wage for tipped workers across DC to be the same as the regular minimum wage, because it was, I think, like $3 an hour plus tips at the time. It would have raised it to the regular minimum wage, which was $15 at the time, plus tips on top. The voters voted for it, passed it 54-46, which was despite a ton of really intense lobbying from the restaurant industry, from the Restaurant Association of Metro Washington. But then the majority of the council decided to repeal it and overturn the will of the voters. In 2022, DSA organizers, when we found out it was going to be on the ballot again, did not want that to happen again. So we went to bat really hard for this. We were out every weekend for months before the campaign, canvassing all across the city. We had one-on-ones with workers in the restaurant industry to talk to them about the initiative. We recorded videos of workers who were supportive to try to campaign for it, and we did a ton of oppo research into restaurant groups that were donating against the initiative, and positive research that we published about ways that the initiative would not destroy the restaurant industry and would in fact improve people's lives. We ended up winning that campaign 74-26. So we ended up bringing it up 20 points in 4 years. And we won every single precinct in DC. So from wealthy Ward 3 to more working class Ward 8, every single precinct voted for this initiative. And in the 4 years since Initiative 77, 2 of the seats that had on the council who had voted to repeal Initiative 77 were replaced with DSA-endorsed council members who are committed to keeping it. And so that is now money in the pockets of restaurant workers. And it's taken effect. Wages are already increasing, and we can see that effect. And so I think that's like a very long way of saying what my answer is that I think like I am personally committed to, trying to bring folks who are maybe national politics is the first time that they've been activated by politics. It's maybe the only thing that they pay attention to, and really trying to connect with folks about like what their day-to-day issues are, and then bringing them into the fact that local organizing can address a lot of those issues.
We'll hear a little bit more from you about local organizing efforts later. Would anyone else like to share?
Sure, I'd love to. I think that's a great starting off point for something I'd love to talk about. It's like what we're doing with the Poor People's Campaign, and particularly what you said. Appreciate you. Okay, we good now? Okay, thank you. And don't mind my notes. I have some facts, and I like to be correct when I am spitting these facts. So we organize state-based movements. We build broad-based coalitions of faith leaders, directly impacted people, and we're and advocates organizing across all lines of division to address the interlocking injustices of systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, militarism and the war economy, and the false moral narrative of white Christian nationalism. And why I say that is because right now, regardless of who is in office, right now, poverty is the 4th leading cause of death in this country. Politicians from every single party continue to make concessions for the wealthy, yet leave our families and children to die from poverty. And these politicians currently in office right now are guilty of policy murder. People every single day are dying from a lack of health care, are dying because they don't have access to be able to afford the medicine they need. Thinking about the stories you were just telling about your parent taking off time for health care needs. Just between April of 2023 and March of 2024, an estimated 15 to 18 million people, including 5 million children, were kicked off of Medicaid when the federal public health emergency ended. Right now, there's 52 million people across the United States who are not making living wages. But during the pandemic, billionaire wealth increased by $1.5 trillion, or more than $2 billion a day. So there's an urgency right now to address these things, and getting involved in electoral politics is just one tactic that we can use to build movement. Because at the same time that all these injustices are happening, we know that there are 85 million poor and low wealth voters across the country, and we're seeing unprecedented waves of voter suppression, including gerrymandering, extreme voter ID laws, voter restrictions, and since 2020 alone, there have been over 1,000 voter suppression bills introduced across all 50 states, and that 80 of those bills have been enacted. So at the Poor People's Campaign, we believe that if we can organize and mobilize across the 140 million poor and low people of every race, creed, religion across this country and build a movement that votes, we would have the political power to shift elections up and down the ballot.
Thank you so much. Moving on to some of the more issue-specific questions, Saul, I'd be really interested in hearing from you. As the climate crisis is worsening, on my drive in here, I heard about yet another historic hurricane getting ready to ravage the South. There's been limited progress on policies at the federal or state level. The policies that the Green New Deal Network supports, we know that they're popular. Those are policies that win. But progress has been slow, and even good things like the IRA have been tied to concessions to fossil fuels. I'd be curious to hear what you're proud of about what the Green New Deal Network is doing to ensure that bold action on climate change is a priority of, hopefully, the Harris administration, or if you're less optimistic, what can be done to defend the gains that we've managed to claw out over the last couple of years.
Thanks. Hey, y'all. Yeah, so at the Green New Deal Network, the fundamental premise of the Green New Deal is that the only way we can solve climate change is to use government money and power to do that. Like, there's no other way. Like, billionaires aren't going to save anybody. And so working backwards from there, we need not only the federal purse, but we also need city governments and governments all over the world, particularly in the most well-off countries, to invest that money to solve climate change. And so we build everything backwards from there. We start with, we need to organize to do that. Regular people are going to have to rise up because the folks in power aren't going to do shit. And so how do we work backwards from there? And so for us, the Harris Trump campaign is as opposed to the main headline of our life, one factor in this puzzle of how do we get the government to spend trillions of dollars on climate change instead of murdering children in other countries. And so that's the basic place that we come backwards from. And it's hard to be optimistic in some ways when it is the hottest, year in recorded history. But also a lot of what we do is we take an interpretation of what the opportunities are at the federal level and connect organizers to those, because we believe that change comes from organizing. And so we build this bridge between our organizers in 25 different states who are doing climate justice, labor organizing, fighting environmental racism and fossil fuel projects, trying to build new trains and buses that have excellent service. We try and connect those folks to what's the opportunity for your organizing to actually win. Because if we say, oh, well, there's the inside-outside people, and then, people try and, corporations and mainstream politicians try and divide, draw these lines between, let's say, our friends at the Uncommitted movement and our friends who are in the street protesting the DNC on Palestine. And it's actually this is the whole group of people who are right. Fuck everybody else, right? And they try and draw these lines. So in the climate movement, and in the Green New Deal Network, what we're trying to do is work backwards from, we need to invest $1 trillion every year by 2030. It's actually the federal government, as much as they try and make it opaque, is extremely predictable. There's going to be certain moments when money has to move in specific months and years between now and 2030. And so what we're doing is figuring out how do we move money towards climate and ending environmental racism and creating green jobs in each of those moments. And so for us, instead of thinking about do we really like Kamala Harris? Are we going to stop organizing on Palestine if we try and get certain groups to vote for her? We're just we need the government to invest money. What's the organizing context in which that's most likely? Okay, it's probably going to be important for us to know some of these people who are in the Harris orbit, and we've actually endorsed them to try, in part, to try and keep them from going back on the Green New Deal, which so far has been good, but it's a daily interesting adventure. I'm going to just leave it at that. But anyways, just to give some examples, we're working backwards from the equivalent. The Farm Bill has not passed, and so how do we get more climate money in the Farm Bill? The Surface Transportation Reauthorization is the Farm Bill for highways and trains, And like that's a fight that we know is going to happen in 2026. So right now we're about to launch a 2-year campaign aimed at maximizing how much money is spent on buses, trains, and accessible disability-friendly infrastructure, and minimizing how much is spent on expanding highways, which drive fossil fuel consumption. So we connect organizing strategy that's locally led with what are the opportunities to win federal dollars from these different moments. And that's kind of the synergy that we're doing in the movement for a Green New Deal. And the last thing I'll say is we recently organized this side project called Train Lovers for Harrison Walls. We're having a really big party on Thursday if you want to come out with a bunch of other friends. And it's really interesting space because, you know, some people were like, Saul, you're a socialist. What are you doing? And I was like, hey, you know, we have some really centrist people who love trains in that group. And we have some socialists who are like, if I was going to give any money to Harris, I'd want it to be part of a project to show her that the transit community is part of her constituency. And if she wins, we need her to invest in trains. And so, and we've been mentioned in the Washington Post, on MSNBC, we've been, you know, they write about us in Streetsblog and all of that. We're trying to create the conditions to win that money campaign. And yeah, also, like, would I prefer, as someone who grew up 20 minutes from Dearborn, having a President Harris, having President Trump? Yeah, like, I can make a comment like that, even if, like, I'm still going to show up at every uncommitted protest, right? So, or other Palestine protests, or protests against Willow, or what have you. But part of the way we're thinking about it is like, how can this election be a means to an end? How have we now organized almost 2,000 people into this transit community to keep pushing after we hopefully Democrats win in November? Because we're just building our organizing context so that we can hustle day one and try and build some fast trains. So that's what we're doing.
Trains might be the thing that unite us all. Thank you so much. Did anyone hear something in Saul's response that's connected to work they're doing or they'd otherwise like to share? We can also move on to our next question and come back around to it. The next question I have is for Aparna. DC is home to the White House, Congress, the Supreme Court, also nearly every federal agency. But there are also nearly 800,000 people who live here, people who call it home. The DSA in the recent years has become a truly major player in local elections. We're interested in hearing how the Metro DC DSA has turned this electoral activism into political power, maybe using your inside-outside strategy.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm actually glad I'm next because I did actually want to say something right after Saul, which was just, you know, kind of in that vein. Like, I think about sort of like that AOC quote that's just, like, we're not voting for somebody, we're trying to pick the organizing condition, or like what we want to organize against, basically. Like, I am not a fan of Kamala Harris, but I also like home rule in DC. You know, I also like having local government. I also, there are just so many threats that I don't want to see happen. And as a socialist in this country, I'm personally really scared of what a fascist presidency with like the full state apparatus could mean. And so, yeah, just wanted to also add that kind of like thought on as well. But to your question more specifically, I think there are a couple parts to that question about sort of like the inside-outside strategy as far as DSA sees it. I think one is like making ourselves indispensable, like showing that we have the power to win and putting that into practice. And then another part is really only like picking candidates that we really are going to throw down for, that we really align with, that we really see, which is something that we learn through trial and error, but that we like really, see as sort of like our movement electeds. And then the last thing I think is like we have the electoral campaigns going on, but we also have tenant organizing, we have labor organizing, we have other things that are building a base across the district. So then that way, when we are campaigning for folks, or when we are saying, hey, we want rent stabilization, or we want social housing, it's not, just us as like people in the meeting who are saying it. We have the backing of the 2,000 dues-paying members of Metro DC DSA, the thousands of tenants that we organize with, who are also a part of that. I just to also give folks a little sort of local political history for those who may not know, for decades, or for years, maybe not decades, there's been a political machine in DC called the Green Team, basically neoliberal political machine, cares more about small business than about workers, cares more about the real estate industry than tenants, cares more about gutting public schools than students, and it's basically just about lining folks' pockets. It's the political machine that got Adrian Fenty elected to Ward 4 and then to mayor. It's the machine that got Mayor Bowser elected to Ward 4 and then to mayor. It got Brandon Todd elected to Ward 4, and he may have become the mayor until Councilmember Janice Lewis-George unseated him in 2020. Also DSA endorsed. DSA had been organizing across the region, doing electoral campaigns across the region, and winning some of them for years, but that was the first time we really had a huge win in DC. And then in 2022, we were a huge part of the Zachary Parker campaign, knocked 40,000 doors, basically gave up 6 months of our lives to get him elected. And then similarly with Initiative 82, knocked nearly 20,000 doors. And we showed that it wasn't a fluke. We showed that we were building our own political movement to take on this machine. And you can see that, the mayor sees it. A lot of sort of more conservative folks on the council see it. But I think that's part of what gives us that power is we are, it's not just the canvases, it's the calls to members to try to turn them out. It's talking to them and making them feel like they have a stake in the election. It's so much unseen work that goes into this, and we're willing to throw down that time, and the results come out. And so that's one reason I think why we are able as outsiders to have a little bit more sort of of some sort of governing relationship with some of the electeds is that they know that we will back them up. Even if they don't depend on our win, they know that we'll back them up, like we did with Janice Lewis-George again in 2024 when she was facing a right-wing challenge focused on public safety. And then the other thing that I just want to say is one thing that I think differentiates Councilmember Lewis-George from other council members is not just her values, but the reason why she ran. She's not just an advocate for people. She decided to run because of three things. One, she was a waitress to get herself through law school, and years later she saw Brandon Todd vote to repeal Initiative 77, the current council member. Her family almost got displaced from DC, almost lost their home, but they were able to use the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act at the time to be able to buy their home from their landlord and stay in DC in Ward 4. And then months later, Brandon Todd voted to carve out single-family homes from the TOPA law. And then she had stayed home with her sick dad to take care of him, and then months later saw Brandon Todd vote against paid family leave and paid sick leave. So she is not just somebody who is an advocate. She has lived these issues and she cares for these issues. And I think that's why part of why we also see ourselves in her is we do this, we organize, we give up our time, and we volunteer for these campaigns because we know it's not just a theoretical thing that we agree with. We know that our lives, our family's lives, our friends' lives depend on it. So I think, and then also, as I mentioned, we have constant tenant organizing going on, and Janice Lewis-George has met with a lot of the tenants that we organize with in Ward 4, has talked to the Attorney General to try to get him to sue the buildings that are the slumlords in DC, and so we've had inside outside is not a perfect formula. You're going to get some people who decide they don't need you anymore. You're going to get some people who decide that maybe money is more important than the people power you're able to provide. But it is something that we are starting to cohere, and it's something that we've seen succeed really well with council members like Janice Lewis-George in Ward 4, like Delegate Gabriel Acevero in Maryland, and sort of other electeds that we've worked with. And so we'd also love to just talk more if other folks have ideas of how to make this work, because it's an ongoing thing that we're trying to figure out.
Thank you for sharing with us. I think that ties really well into Siggy's work with the Poor People's Campaign, and I will bring us over to Siggy in just a second. I wanted to say a quick thank you to Reverend Latoska out there from the Petworth United Methodist Church. Thank you. We appreciate you welcoming us into your beautiful church. Come sit, grab a drink. It's free for you. And then to anyone else who's outside, if you want to take a seat, you can go around the back. There are a couple more seats over here, or find an organizer, and we will bring up some folding chairs for you. All right.
Could I just add something?
Absolutely. Thank you, Brianni.
Okay. I don't like mics because I feel like I naturally talk very loud. But I just wanted to add in that all that I keep hearing is just like about people power. And thank you. Yeah, I just keep hearing how important people power is, and how like that is really gonna save our election. It's like we can't keep expecting people to kind of just give us things. We have to think 2 years ahead. We have to have a campaign for 2 years to get something that we know is not even going to be an idea or tangible until 2026. We're doing things like at CPD, we're supporting the AOC social housing bill. One of our big national our big national campaign, which is a campaign that all of our affiliates, we have 51 affiliates across 35 states and DC and Puerto Rico. And we are focusing on housing because people don't have a place to live, and it's extremely unaffordable to find a place to live. I feel like I'm a victim of this as well, and why we need affordable housing. It's expensive being, a 24-year-old who wants to live by themselves. It's not very accessible. So whenever we talk about housing at CPD, I'm always like the first one to like raise their hand and tell them how much my rent costs. And they're all like, when I was 24, I wasn't paying $1,000 for rent. I was paying a couple $100. And I'm like, yeah, you see why we need to make a more affordable wage. You see why I'm 24 and I need to have 2 degrees to make what 1 degree was supposed to make me. But at CPD, we're all about the people power because we are representing the working class. And the working class, which is, I'm sure, all of us in this room, we're the ones that are voting in November. Like, the working class is voting in November, and we're voting as the working class. And I think that we're starting to see more of that now, and we're starting to see more people want to get involved in what's happening, and like want to knock on doors, and like want to phone bank, and they're like, what can I do? I just had so many experiences and so many feelings while in Chicago during the DNC week, and I was just so amazed to see like how people are genuinely very hopeful and very excited for this election. And this is only my second election, and I haven't had really good stakes both times, but I'm going to do what I got to do this time so that hopefully we don't have to do this again. But I just really, really feel like that's like a very common thing between all of us, is that we know that people are going to be the ones that are voting. Renters are going to be voting in November. People who want home ownership are going to be voting in November, and people who care about having a planet to live on at least, a couple decades. I'd like to do a couple more things, but that is going to be like the common cause. I feel like the common thing that we're all going to say is like, people. So definitely make sure you ask us some more questions after this, because we really, really, really need y'all and we need everybody to be like boots on the ground. Like, we need to just be showing up everywhere we can, just pushing for all of the working class issues, the issues that are actually affecting people, and not the issues that are just affecting the 1%.
On the topic of people, I think Siggy is one of our experts on there as the director of organizing at the Poor People's Campaign. Millions of poor or low wealth people could swing this election. The slogan, in fact, this year is "We are the swing vote." It's interesting because candidates with the amount of money in elections, despite needing the poor and low wealth people to vote for them, often bring them up as a talking point. J.D. Vance from my own home state of Ohio loves to drag that one out. How much truth there is to that remains to be seen. But the real truth is that poor and low income people help win elections. They're necessary and you can't win without them. We're curious how the Poor People's Campaign is making that truth visible to campaigns. We want to hear how you're sharing how indispensable people that you organize are in this election with your election outreach programs, and what impact that could have on the 2024 election, and if you think the candidates and campaigns are aware of that.
I think they're aware. Did I do that right? All right. So I think they're aware of everything that folks are doing on this panel and in this room, because we're starting to hear them use our language on their campaign trails, how they're responding. So there is a lot of hope there. We know that we have not seen the level of action needed to address poverty being the fourth leading cause of death in this country. Low wages, housing, healthcare, the climate, militarism, the ongoing genocide in Gaza, Sudan, Congo, all around the world. And we also know at the Poor People's Campaign, this is not just about the last 90 days to November. We know there is nothing that can replace the slow work of building relationships with your neighbors and your community, and how long that takes to build trust amongst folks to take sustained action together. So I want to talk about what we mean by "we are the swing vote." I want to go back a few months to last year in February when the Poor People's Campaign launched 40 weeks of massive nonpartisan voter mobilization to do just that, to wake the sleeping giant of poor and low wealth infrequent voters all across the country. So last March, we had simultaneous state house assemblies in 34 states and DC, so 35 states. And it was a massive display of our collective power as a movement. And we picked state houses because, like I said in the introduction, we build state-based movements because that's where some of the most regressive policies are happening. So then, like you just mentioned, in June of this year, we had mass Poor People's and Low-Wage Workers Assembly and Moral March on Washington and to the polls to come together in the nation's capital to demand immediate and transformative action to address the systemic injustices in our nation. We declared that we would not accept poverty as the fourth leading cause of death in this country, and that we would come together and unite around a 17-point agenda to engage in mass voter mobilization in poor and low-wage communities through every means necessary. So we are doing that by traditional methods of text banking. We are doing door-to-door canvassing. We're canvassing in the streets. We're massive social media and earned media campaigns. And so why do we say that we are the swing vote? So back in 2021, the Poor People's Campaign released our landmark report called Waking the Sleeping Giant. The poor and low-income voters, it was an analysis of the 2020 election. So in this report, we demonstrated that if poor and low-income voters, who are accounting for 85 million Americans, voted at similar rates as higher-income people back in 2016, they would have matched or exceeded the margin of victory in the presidential election. Our report proved that the biggest opportunity to build support around a moral agenda that lifts from the bottom amongst poor and low-income voters, that we could shift elections up and down the ballot. So in 2022, we had a massive voter mobilization drive that reached out to 8.5 million poor and low-income voters ahead of the general elections and the Georgia special election. And our study after 2022 showed that if poor and low-wage and frequent voters who represented over 30% of the electorate could be organized around an agenda that addresses their needs, that they would have the power, again, to shift the outcome of every election up and down the ballot. So want to talk a little bit about, what that could mean this upcoming election. In 2020, in states like Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Texas, and Wisconsin all had a margin of victory as a percentage of low-income voters that was less than 30%. So what that means in real numbers and votes and people, places like North Carolina, the margin of victory was around 75,000 votes. But there were over 1 million low-income voters who did not vote. In Michigan, it was 150,000 votes, but 1.3 million did not vote. In Pennsylvania, that was 80,000, but 1.2 million did not vote. In Georgia, it was 11,000 votes, but 1 million people did not vote. In Wisconsin, I think you can see there's a pattern here, right? Over 20,000, it was just over 20,000 votes, but 645,000 folks did not vote. And here in DC, there are 150,000 poor and low wealth voters. But in 2020, 70,000. So I know things are a bit different here in DC in terms of the margin of victory, but still there are 70,000 voters in 2020 that are poor and low wealth people that eligible voters that did not vote here in DC. So again, we know that if poor and low wage and frequent voters could be organized around an agenda that reflects their needs, they have the power to determine the outcome of every election. So in some of those states, it was thousands of votes that determined that election, while over 1 million people, they're poor and low wealth, did not vote. So we launched that last February. In March, we had State House assemblies. In June, we had our mass assembly here at the nation's capital. And then throughout the rest of this season, this is all to reach out to at least 15 million poor and low-wage and frequent voters through, like I said, strategic door-to-door canvassing, text banking, and all forms of social media. So starting this weekend, we're launching our canvassing across the country and starting to text these millions and millions of voters to reach that 15 million. So this is mostly volunteer-led by our state coordinating committees that are active in 36 states across the countries. It's our allies, our partners who are building power that's going to last beyond the election. So it's all about building power locally. Just you drilled into our brains and you're talking here locally. It's all about building power in this moment and using the election as an opportunity to do that, but also knowing that we're going to need that power November 6th, 7th, 8th, and needing to do the work now to continue to build our bases and continue to build relationships with each other.
Thank you. Brianni, with the 51 different affiliates involved in your organization, we are coming to you with a question soon, but Siggy's answer reminded me of a question that I had submitted earlier today. One of the dominant conversations that has been coming up with regard to this election concerns the idea that because of the Democratic nominee's policies on the genocide in Palestine, there's a large group of people who, for one reason or another, may not be as interested in voting. And I think there are also other issues, economic, social issues, issues at home and abroad, that may be inducing people to not vote. Or certainly there's a concern about that. If these large or valuable block of voters are not as valuable, not as mobilized as they could be by candidates, we'll manage. It's grounded, right, Patrick? It's a flood. Your organization's supposed to know about that kind of thing. Yes. So the idea that there may be this large and valuable block of voters who isn't as mobilized as they could be by a group of candidates. Your organizations represent a diverse array of constituencies who are eligible in many cases to vote this November. What are you hearing from your constituents about this? Are they more interested in organizing in other ways? Is there something that candidates could do to maybe fill that gap if it is there in the first place?
Oh, me? Oh.
Oh,
okay.
that's for anyone.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I don't mean to spring that one on you, but
like,
please feel free to answer.
I can still go. So I know. So for us, again, working class families. So we also represent a lot of undocumented folks. So immigration is really high on the ballot for us this year, and I think that there are some policies now that are coming out as the Harris campaign is starting to let us know more about what policies are going to be at the forefront of their agenda, what they're doing, what they plan to do within their first 100 days. Hopefully we hear some housing being dropped and some immigration being dropped during the debate tonight. But I would say our constituents are really, really focused on housing. They're really, really focused on immigration. And Palestine is a big factor for us. And it's definitely a conversation that we're starting, like that we've been having, but that we're making sure that we include in the conversation when we're talking about GOTV time and we're talking about how many doors we're going to knock and all this canvassing that we're going to do. And it's like just keeping in mind that that is still going to come up. That is something that we should all be prepared to talk about and can talk about confidently with voters, with our canvas teams, and just making sure that we know all of the issues that are affecting our members. And the states specifically that I'm thinking about are really like in Pennsylvania, where we have Make the Road. And Make the Road is an organization that has a membership in Pennsylvania, in New York, in Nevada as well. And I was just in Nevada doing a bird dog training with them in a Project 2025 training, and they were all so excited to know that they now know about this thing that they felt like people were trying to like hide from them, or like, why is no one talking about this with us? And one of the things that came up was that there was a language barrier a lot of the times. And one of the things that I had to acknowledge as like a trainer was, in order to reach these folks, in order to get them the information that they need to bring back to their communities, to do the voter tripling and all of that, they need to be able to understand it fully, the extent of why this is bad. And I need to be able to relay that. So I worked with with a translator, and I made sure that the translator knew. And just so you know, there's no word for bird dog in Spanish. If you put it in Google Translate, it gives you something very random. But I had it all in all of my slide decks all over the place, and they were all like, "What is that? What are you talking about?" But because I took the time to sit with the translator and say, like, how would you say this? Like, we need to explain this tactic to them. But bird dogging there's no Spanish word for this. And because we took that time to actually go through and like explain to them what it was and like the tactic in their language in a way that they could understand, they were so much more excited. They were so much more engaged. And I was like, that just was one nugget for me of just like being in Vegas and being in that room and like teaching and like telling someone about something that is life-changing. Like the Project 2025 is scary, and it's something that we all need to also keep in mind as we're going to the polls in November. And I think that they're now like, we have to support everything that is against Project 2025. And if that's what it's going to take to fire them up and to make sure that they tell their friends and they all go out and they vote, or they tell all their friends, because if they can't vote, they're going to make sure that they're still knocking doors to get all the people who can vote to vote. If I have to use Project 2025 as the scare tactic to get them, then that's what we're going to do. But they just understand, and they fully they fully understand, and they understand the extent of why this election is so important, and they're willing to do anything to win at this point. And I think that's like the best energy. Like I feel like our constituents and our members are fired up and they're ready to win, because they're also ready to put their foot on Kamala's back to make sure that she knows we have an agenda too, and you're not going to win and not do anything. Like, we actually have things that you need to get done, and you have to get those done if you want us to keep supporting you.
We'll save some time for the rest of the panelists to address that question. But Brianni, since you shouted out Make the Road and some of the affiliates out in Vegas, I'd actually love to hear a little bit more about some of the affiliates that you're excited about during this election season. You guys have some of the most dynamic and exciting state-based and local organizing going on across the country. So shout out a couple more for us.
Yeah, so I'm really excited about the Make the Road races, Make the Road Nevada. They are just amazing. They're like leading every canvas that we have, and their canvases are really solid too. They've won some big races. Pennsylvania, we have Make the Road Pennsylvania, Center for Cofield Justice as well in Pennsylvania. Our New York orgs are like always throwing down. They're doing a lot around like housing. I'm trying to think who else. We have some Midwest orgs, Wisconsin, Block in Wisconsin, Lit in Wisconsin, which is a group of young people who are organizing. And I've also done some bird dog trainings with them, and they're all super excited to do some bird dogging this election season. And I think that we honestly have like a solid group of folks that are going to be canvassing from now, that have already started canvassing past November. Like, they have like campaigns that they're intertwining into their GOTV movement to show that GOTV is not just, the last 2 months leading up to the election. Like, GOTV is something that we need to be doing all the time, and continuing to apply pressure. My role to support them as the actions coordinator is to make sure that I'm providing a space for them to vocalize their concerns and their campaigns in public, in front of the media, in front of with partnering with other organizations to do it, in front of the Supreme Court, on the Hill, doing civil disobedience and getting arrested, because it's that serious, right? And I think that overall, our constituency in our membership base is going to grow after November. And our entire goal as the Center for Popular Democracy is to grow the membership of our affiliates and to do whatever we can to build more people power and to bring more of the working class together. And I think that we're doing that across the country. We have people in Florida, Florida Rising. We have Georgia and New Georgia Project and Step Up Louisiana, and they're doing Dollar Tree work. They're supporting the Dollar Tree workers and getting them a fair wage and fair health, and everyone's doing so much. But I always say CPD is the place that covers all the isms. Like, we have like, if you ask me, I'm gonna be like, we have a campaign for that. We have a campaign for that.
Well, thanks so much for sharing some of those fantastic campaigns with us. As we move towards closing tonight and get ready for the debate to kick off, elections are exhausting. We're 10 weeks out right now, and I'm already kind of exhausted. Tying that back to the idea that some people may not be as mobilized as the campaigns could be counting on, what can we do to do what we need to do over the next 10 weeks in our bases and beyond, but also to save capacity and energy to push hard and win the things that our communities need after November?
So I'd love to speak to that. So first I'll say, as people, yes, this is a we should absolutely be pushing as hard as we can, getting involved, taking those extra couple hours out of our week volunteering for for something that we care deeply about to expand their organizational capacity. But we also are just that, human. And we need to, if we want to challenge the structures of capitalism and white supremacy, we also need to incorporate that into our organizing, and that means resting, and that means taking care of ourselves so that we can be there on November 6th, 7th, and 8th, 9th, 10th, next month. And for the Poor People's Campaign, we organize from an organizing framework called Moral Fusion Organizing, and one of the steps of Moral Fusion Organizing is to resist a one-moment mentality, because there's no one election that can stop us or break us. There's no one decision, no one action that can stop us or break us. So that we need to do the work to be able to, yes, push really hard in moments like this, but also sustain energy and power so we're not stuck in a one-moment mentality.
Yeah, I like that. I can add. To me, part of it is about picking the intersections. So identifying what are the places where we can move forward our movements against white supremacy and other things at the same time as we're doing work as it relates to the campaign. And so I have some friends who are doing organizing where they're just talking about how Donald Trump is a white supremacist fascist because they're not in a place where they're comfortable talking about how they love Kamala Harris. Well, that's a great contribution because Donald Trump is a white supremacist fascist and someone needs to say it. There's other people who are organizing around strategic issues where it's like, okay, what we're going to do here, and I think back to your question about Palestine, this is, as a Michigander, one thing the press really didn't cover sufficiently is that many of the 100,000 people who voted uncommitted in the state of Michigan were actually not going to vote or were going to vote for Trump. And that movement provided a huge service to Biden and Harris by keeping a lot of people in the Democratic primary, by giving them hope of let's try and get a ceasefire, let's try and get an arms embargo. And so there's different types of strategic interventions that we can make of different kinds of attacking Trump or otherwise. Or in our case right now, just talking about high-speed rail as if it's our only value and interest in life, which is somewhat true, but nevertheless, we stay complex. But finding those different intersections, I think, is really rich because then we can find a way to contribute to an overall project and also move the left forward at the same time. And that way we're already building for what's next and not running ourselves into the ground trying to do a little bit of everything.
Yeah, I am probably going to echo what the both of you said. I think two things. I think one is similar to what you were saying, Saul, where DSA is not going to endorse Kamala Harris. We definitely don't want Trump to win, but I think, what we've found instead is, one, we don't have the power to influence a presidency regardless, and two, we're much more effective in state and local races, and we would much rather throw down for state and local socialists who are running for office. And we saw in 2022 that when we endorsed Zachary Parker, there were two other candidates who we didn't endorse who were running for citywide races, who were nominally progressive. Robert White was running for mayor, Aaron Palmer was running for chair, and we saw in Ward 5, where we were canvassing, that they both overperformed in that ward, largely because our canvassing helped turn out voters in that ward who were progressive. And we're taking, we have, DSA as a national organization has races endorsed across the country, and locally we are right now in the process of voting to endorse the ballot initiative in Maryland that would basically codify abortion and reproductive rights in their state constitution. So that's a little bit of the strategy that we're taking around this election. And also, one of the things in terms of just sort of preserving yourself, one of the things that I learned outside of sort of rest and everything is really just finding my thing, finding my one or two campaigns that I would really, really commit to and throw down for and see to the end. Because I am much more effective really going all in with a rent strike at a building than I am with trying to go to every protest that's happening in a week. And it's really difficult because, to paraphrase Audre Lorde, we don't live single issue lives, and everything is intersected. But, I think about that thing is, are you thinking about forming a union at your workplace? Are you thinking about organizing around the conditions in your building? Because the rent strike, one of the buildings I've been organizing with on rent strike, I started organizing with them in 2020. They've been dealing with conditions for years before that. They're just now possibly getting a new buyer, and the conditions still aren't fixed. It is a long, long process, and in general, we've talked a lot about, every panelist I think has talked about how people power and building people power is a long-term fight, and we need to consider that and think about that. And so I think, I would also just recommend finding the one or two things that you will really see to the end, see through, and anytime something else comes up, even if it feels important to throw down on, think about is this other thing that I need to prioritize? Am I pulling away from that? Am I not giving that the full attention that I need to? Because I think we are all much more effective being effective organizers on these one or two things and then being able to mobilize all those things together than we are just sort of stretching everywhere.
Brianni, was there anything you wanted to add? You said a lot already. Well, that's it for us then. Thank you so much to our wonderful panelists. Let's hear it for our panelists. We really appreciate all of you coming out. You've all made it sound like there's some fantastic work happening in your communities. If you're open to, what are we looking for?
Sorry, we need to sing Happy Birthday.
Well, we're not singing while I have a microphone. No one wants that.